By 2008, TNA had finally started to find its feet, with a unique six-sided ring, the high-flying X division, and a deep roster of talent. TNA was drawing bigger crowds, expanding globally, and seemed ready to become the next big thing in professional wrestling. But then, in 2009, things started to go badly wrong, and they started losing fans on a weekly basis. In this video, we're counting down 10 reasons that made fans say, "I'm done with TNA." Yes, Mick Foley is a wrestling legend, but after decades of putting his body through hell, he was well and truly washed up by 2009. He should have been enjoying his retirement on a beach somewhere, and yet, in one of TNA's most baffling decisions, they made him world champion. Foley was visibly out of shape as he struggled along for 16 minutes before escaping the cage to win the title. Even the TNA fans, who were usually enthusiastic, were dead quiet as he lifted the belt. Bearing in mind they had talent like AJ Styles, Samoa Joe and Bobby Roode on the roster, most people just couldn't work out why Foley was made the champion. His title reign only lasted for 2 months, but that in itself was far too long. Fans were so frustrated by having Foley stinking up the main event scene, but things were about to get much, much worse. At the end of 2009, Dixie Carter made the decision to hire Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff. In Carter's mind, bringing in the most famous wrestler in history would be the catalyst to making TNA on the same level as WWE. Always the master of persuasion, Hogan convinced Carter that she needed to bring Bischoff in too. Hogan pointed to Bischoff's role in WCW's success during the start of the Monday Night Wars, promising that he could do it all over again, this time in TNA. But the reality was a disaster. One of the first things that fans noticed was the blatant nepotism. Hogan and Bischoff brought in their family members, including Hogan's daughter Brooke and Bischoff's son Garrett, despite them being utterly useless. Hogan also filled TNA's roster with his old friends like Bubba the Love Sponge, the Nasty Boys and Scott Hall. Their involvement contributed nothing, and they took up valuable time and space that should have been given to fresh talent. And incredibly, most of these Nepo hires showed up on Hogan and Bischoff's first night in the company. For many fans, they could see that Hogan and Bischoff were going to be poison for TNA right from the start. Upon seeing this, a lot of those fans turned the channel over and they never came back. But for the fans that stuck around, these two new sheriffs in town were going to do a whole lot more damage to TNA in the coming months and years. One of the things that made TNA stand out was its six-sided ring. The six-sided ring had become a symbol of TNA's identity, and fans saw it as one of the things that made the promotion different to WWE. But soon after Hogan and Bischoff debuted in the Impact Zone, that was thrown out the window. They thought that the six-sided ring looked too gimmicky and felt that a more conventional ring was necessary to give the product mainstream appeal. Bischoff actually argued that someone flipping the channel wouldn't realise that it was a wrestling show unless it was in a four-sided ring, which is one of the dumbest arguments ever, by the way. And Hogan even told the fans to grow up when they started chanting that they wanted the six-sided ring back. It's easy to dismiss this as a small change, but the fans took it extremely personally. The shape of the ring became a constant reminder that the axis of Bischoff and Hogan were a force for evil, and it also proved that they weren't willing to do what the fans wanted, and that was a terrible sign for the future. When Hogan and Bischoff first arrived in TNA, they didn't waste any time convincing Dixie Carter that they could take the company to the next level, and by that they meant to compete directly with WWE. Not that it took much to convince Dizzy Dixie, because, of course, she was clueless. They advised her to move Impact from Thursday nights to Monday nights and go head-to-head with WWE Raw. They convinced Dixie that this was going to be a revival of the legendary Monday Night War. But the ratings told the real story. Impact got crushed week after week for 2.5 months. In May of 2010, Dixie Carter announced that TNA was moving back to Thursday nights. It was what the fans demanded, she said, but in reality, those fans were pissed off. Their favourite wrestling promotion came away from this second version of the Monday Night War looking utterly pathetic. TNA was always a distant second place to WWE, but now it also felt like a second-rate product. While Hogan and Bischoff were putting TNA on the road to ruin in 2010, Ric Flair made his debut in the company. It could have been a great moment, adding the legendary Nature Boy to the roster, but instead what followed was one of the saddest chapters in Flair's career. After his perfect retirement at WrestleMania 24, Flair just couldn't help himself and stay away from the spotlight, and he ended up tarnishing his legacy in TNA. From his very first promo in the company, he was a rambling, incoherent mess, and his matches weren't much better, where he went through his old routine in slow motion and tried to overcompensate by bleeding buckets in every match he appeared in. In WWE, he would never have been allowed to embarrass himself like this. It was like seeing your favourite uncle losing his mind. Seeing Flair like this, week after week, was enough to make some fans tune out of TNA for good. By 2011, executive producer Eric Bischoff had put TNA into a nosedive. TNA's decline under Bischoff was clear to see, especially at its pay-per-views, and there was no single event that encapsulated that better than Victory Road 2011, a pay-per-view that's still remembered as one of the worst nights in TNA's history. The main event was a match that went down in legend for all the wrong reasons. Jeff Hardy showed up visibly intoxicated and in no condition to wrestle. Hardy was barely able to stand upright. They had to turn this into a 90-second squash match, with Sting holding Hardy down for the pinfall. Loyal TNA fans were shocked that they allowed a pay-per-view to end so unprofessionally. Victory Road 2011 should have been a wake-up call for TNA, but they learned absolutely nothing. The terrible booking continued all the way into 2012, including one of the most infamous storylines in the company's history, the Claire Lynch and AJ Styles angle. Eric Bischoff came up with a storyline that would forever be remembered as a low point in the company's history. It involved AJ Styles, who was accused of having an affair with a woman named Claire Lynch. She was supposedly pregnant with his child. The story quickly devolved into a total mess, filled with accusations of drug use, infidelity, and over-the-top melodrama. It was absolute nonsense. Claire Lynch was played by one of the worst actresses ever, and her performance turned many fans off almost immediately. It was the kind of rubbish that wouldn't have even been acceptable in a daytime soap opera. And for a whole bunch of fans, this was the final nail in the coffin. At first, the Aces and Eights storyline was pretty damn interesting. These guys were introduced as a masked biker gang attacking TNA wrestlers, and the mystery surrounding their identity made it an exciting part of the show. Fans were keen to see who was behind the masks. It was a fresh and unpredictable story, at least for the first few weeks. But the initial promise quickly began to fade. This thing devolved into yet another attempt by Bischoff to recreate the NWO in TNA. Just like the NWO, the Aces and Eights became a bloated, overexposed faction that dominated the show every week, and the storyline just dragged on and dragged on without any clear resolution. The factions unmasking was a turning point in the wrong direction for this bunch of bikers. Almost everyone under the balaclavas were hugely disappointing reveals. When one of the surprises is Eric's useless son Garrett Bischoff, you know there's a problem. Bully Ray's heel turn was a highlight. He was so good at playing that character, but it came far too late to save this motor crash of an angle. The Aces and Eights represented Eric Bischoff's lack of creativity and reliance on old ideas from WCW. By 2013, TNA had developed a bad reputation for hyping things up only to deliver massive letdowns. One of the clearest examples of this came in the form of the August the 1st warning.
Warning of my arrival. This is needed. This is happening. This is day one. See you Thursday.
Cryptic promos aired for weeks, teasing the arrival of a mysterious figure. Fans expected a major wrestling debut, someone like Batista or Goldberg for example. Instead, it was revealed to be Tito Ortiz, a former UFC fighter who had no connection to wrestling. The fans were frustrated by this, to say the least. It wasn't just the disappointment of it being Ortiz, but the fact that TNA had overpromised and underdelivered once again. And for many fans, this reveal was yet more confirmation that the company was in the toilet. By the time Hulk Hogan left TNA in October 2013, most fans were glad to see the back of the big orange bastard. His presence had become a constant reminder of the damage he and Bischoff had done to the promotion, but him leaving the company wasn't the positive moment that you might have expected it to be. His exit turned into an embarrassing spectacle, especially for Dixie Carter. As Hogan attempted to walk out, Dixie pathetically clung to his leg, begging him to stay. Of course, the entire angle was booked by Bischoff, and it was yet another sign of how out of touch he was as executive producer. The moment was symbolic of how Dixie had let Hogan and Bischoff run roughshod over TNA. For years, she just handed over the reins, allowing them to come up with their crap ideas and run the promotion into the ground. For many of TNA's once loyal fans, this cringeworthy moment perfectly captured everything wrong with the company's management. They didn't turn off because Hogan was leaving, they turned off because TNA had completely lost its way.